Okay, just for a second, I want you to imagine a world with no GPS, no Google Maps, not even a simple road sign. I mean, for most of human history, that was just reality. So how did we get around? Well, the key piece of tech that let us understand, explore, and finally connect our world was the map.
We see maps like this every single day, right? On our phones, on our screens, but they are so much more than just lines on paper or pixels. They're actually stories. Stories of discovery, they're instruments of power, and yeah, they were crucial tools for survival. They don't just show us the world as it is, they show us how different cultures saw themselves in it.
And that really gets to the heart of what we're talking about today. See, we tend to trust maps. We think of them as these neutral, totally objective guides. But the truth is, throughout history, they've been bent, they've been twisted, and sometimes they've been deliberately faked for reasons that go way beyond just getting from point A to point B.
I mean, think about the very first maps humans ever made. We're talking about sketches etched onto clay tablets or painted on cave walls. They weren't for road trips, that's for sure. They were about survival. They showed you where the good hunting grounds were, or the location of a critical river, or even how the stars were laid out for navigating at night. It was a shared language for a community to stay alive.
This comparison shows something really fundamental about us as people. We like to put ourselves at the center of everything. On the left, you've got the ancient Babylonians, who drew their city, Babylon, right in the middle of a flat, round universe. Now fast forward a few centuries and look at the map on the right. Medieval Europeans did the exact same thing, but they put Jerusalem at the center to reinforce their religious worldview. In both cases, the map isn't just about geography, it's a statement about cultural importance.
So that kind of begs the question, right? Does a map even have to be a drawing on paper or clay? That forces us to look beyond our own Western ideas, because for some of the greatest navigators in history, a paper map would have been pretty much useless.
And this is where things get really cool. Check this out. Polynesian seafarers created these incredible three-dimensional stick charts. They don't really map the land, they map the ocean itself. The swells, the currents, the patterns in the wind. The little cowrie shells might represent islands, sure, but the whole thing was basically meaningless without the person who made it explaining it. It was a map perfectly designed for one thing, navigating the massive, open Pacific Ocean.
Okay, so now let's jump from the open ocean over to ancient Greece. This is where a huge revolutionary change happened. Mapmakers started to use mathematics and astronomy to try and create a more scientific and, supposedly objective picture of the world.
And the guy who really changes the game here is Claudius Ptolemy. Around 150 CE, he writes a book called Geographia, and it changes everything. He brings back these ideas of latitude and longitude and provides actual coordinates for thousands of places. His whole goal was to get away from the symbolic maps and move toward a mathematically perfect grid of the world.
But here's the big irony. Ptolemy's method was absolutely brilliant. It was a giant leap forward. His knowledge of the world, though, was limited to what the Romans knew at the time. So you have this incredibly precise mathematical system being used to create a map that's missing the Americas, missing Australia, and has the Indian Ocean as a huge landlocked lake. Whoops!
For the next 1,000 years or so, Ptolemy's work was basically the gold standard. But as we get into the age of exploration, maps take on a brand new role. They become these absolutely vital tools for commerce, for conquest, and for building empires. Mapping a place was really the first step to claiming it as your own.
And that brings us to one of the most famous and, controversial maps in history. In 1569, a guy named Gerardus Mercator creates his projection. Now, its purpose was super specific. He wanted sailors to be able to draw a straight line on the map, follow that single compass direction, and get where they were going. For navigation, it was a total masterpiece.
But that convenience came at a massive cost. To keep those angles correct for sailing, Mercator had to stretch and distort the size of land masses the closer they got to the poles. So on his map, Greenland looks about the same size as Africa. But in reality, Africa is about 14 times bigger. It was a deliberate trade-off for navigation, but it has completely warped our mental image of the world for centuries, making Europe and North America look way bigger and, you could argue, more important than they really are.
And what about all the blank spots on the map, the places nobody had been? Well, as the writer Jonathan Swift pointed out, they didn't just leave them blank. They filled in the gaps with phantom islands that didn't exist, sometimes by mistake, but often on purpose to claim a discovery or just to scare off their rivals. They literally put, "Here be dragons," or, elephants, where their knowledge ran out.
And all this brings us to a really fascinating paradox. We've seen how maps can distort reality. But what if that distortion is actually the whole point? What if a geographically inaccurate map could actually be more useful than a totally truthful one?
The perfect example is the London Underground map. Back in the 1930s, the geographically correct map was an absolute nightmare, just a tangled mess of lines. But a draftsman named Harry Beck had this brilliant insight. He realized that for a commuter, it doesn't matter if the next station is 2 miles away or 3, it just matters that it's the next stop. So he just threw out geographic reality, straightened all the lines, and spaced the stations out evenly. It was a simple lie, but it created a design so clear and so useful that it's now the standard for transit maps all over the world.
Now, Harry Beck's map is a good kind of distortion, right? A useful one. But this basic impulse to change maps for a specific reason, whether it's for clarity, for power, or for straight-up deception, it didn't end with paper maps. It's gone digital, and now the stakes are higher than ever.
I mean, this is a story that just keeps repeating. During World War II, Japanese propaganda maps made their territory look way bigger to boost morale. During the Cold War, the Soviets deliberately put errors into their public maps to mislead spies. Under apartheid, South African maps literally erased black townships from existence to prop up their political ideology. And today, GPS spoofing is used in war zones to send false location data to ships and drones, turning the very act of navigation into a weapon.
The technology has completely changed, right? We've gone from ink on parchment to signals from satellites. But the fundamental use of maps as tools for influence and for control, that's exactly the same. The deception is just faster, it's more widespread, and honestly, it's a lot harder to spot now.
So, where does all this leave us? Well, it leaves us with the understanding that every single map is a product of choices. Somebody, a map maker, decides what to include, what to leave out, what to make look big and important, and what projection to use. And often, what's left off the map is just as telling as what's on it.
And I think the most important thing to take away from all of this is that famous saying from geography: the map is not the territory. It's an interpretation of the territory. It's a representation of reality, sure, but it also helps to create our reality by shaping how we see the world, how we see our history, and our own place in it all.
So, the next time you pull up Google Maps or Waze or whatever you use, just take a second and ask yourself, what little distortions am I accepting here just for convenience? What information is being shown to me first and what's being left out? Whose version of the world am I really looking at?